It is an absolute pleasure to introduce you to Arshena Soktoiva and Claire Lauer, who will be presenting MassMine, Empowering Researchers Through Easy and Ethical Access to Social Media Data. So Arshena is a UX designer at the Decision Theater at ASU, working on creating web application tools for design making across disciplines, social, economic, and environmental. She helps facilitate conversations between different stakeholders, researchers, policymakers, data scientists, and more to incorporate complex systems and models into simple and accessible applications. She worked with researchers on projects for Conservation International, NSF grants around food, energy, and water resilience, and World Economic Forum. Claire is an associate professor of technical communication and user experience at Arizona State University. Her current research investigates how people read data visualizations and are susceptible to deceptive tactics used in graphs. She also researches how to communicate scientific information to public audiences and how to effectively design data-driven interfaces for researchers. She is published on the advantages and pitfalls of data-driven versus manual qualitative language analysis research, how we use language to describe changes in technology-mediated text production, how technology impacts creative thinking and design, how to effectively teach design, and how the work of technical communicators has adapted within the ever-evolving technological workplace. She is the past chair of ACM's Special Interest Group for the Design of Communication and served as the vice chair of operations on the SGB Executive Council of the Association for Computing Machinery, or ACM. So first, thank you guys so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to learn more about MassMine. I've been hearing a little bit about it over email for the past couple of weeks, but I'm gonna pass the presentation mic over to you and we'll rejoin each other for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Liz. Sorry also about that mouthful of an introduction. It was meant to be read, not spoken. Lots of long phrases there. Thank you guys for joining us. We're really excited to have this discussion today because Arshena and I and our team of UX researchers have been working for some time on developing an interface for a social media research tool. And the thing that I want to start off by talking about is why would a humanities researcher want to conduct social media research on a broad scale, on a big data scale? Oftentimes we see humanities researchers conduct research of linguistic interactions over social media, and usually they are particular conversations or events, or they happen at a certain moment, and the language that's used and the interaction is analyzed from a qualitative perspective, and we can get some rich insight into the ways in which people use social media from that qualitative humanistic perspective. But what we were noticing, what the team who is working on MassMine was noticing, is that there are a lot of ways in which big data and large data collection of social media research can supplement the more qualitative research that humanities researchers are doing. But researchers don't have access to that kind of data collection. They don't really know how to even get started with it. And it usually involves methods and technologies that are unfamiliar, and therefore we have a certain skepticism over. Anytime anyone from, I'll just say this is my own bias, anytime anyone from computer science comes at me with a solution that is technical, I always ask about methodology first. I interrogate how data is collected. I interrogate what kinds of ways in which automation happens, how especially when data is automatically sort of analyzed and conclusions are drawn on a large scale. For someone who myself comes from a rhetoric background and has a humanities background, I value the ways in which we take care with faithfully upholding and analyzing the language that people use and their intention, and not sort of giving up on that in the name of big data collection and analysis. So what the history of MassMine is that it was funded as a digital humanities grant to develop a tool that researchers could use to collect large amounts of social media data. And the first round that it was developed as a command line tool. So you would have to know some programming skills, and you would have to know how to set up an API, and you would have to have more confidence in your ability to connect to these social media platforms and these web data platforms. And what we found through that first round of funding was that the tool itself was working, but a lot of people didn't really know how to use the tool. And you really had to have a certain level of confidence to, get to where you wanted to go. And it was continued to be very prohibitive for humanities researchers who aren't always the most technologically adept, because we usually deal with language first. So what we sought to do in the next round of funding, which we were awarded last August, was to create or develop a graphical user interface that would lay on top of the command line interface, so that people who were new to sort of big data collection and social media collection could use simple search terms and Boolean language and sort of interact with a recognizable and unintimidating interface to set up a study in which they could collect social media data. So, there are so many things happening in the world right now that we may want to collect data on. Anything from the Black Lives Matter movement to COVID-19 to even trends within those larger trends, like, for instance, the hashtag #MaskUpArizona, which is currently all over Arizona right now. If you wanted to study how people were using that hashtag and what conversations were going on around that, you could do a search for that hashtag. You could also do a search for keywords like mask up Arizona, the word mask, and you could start collecting all kinds of data that is happening in real time over a platform like Twitter, and then sort of preview the data and decide if you were collecting the right kinds of, if you were searching for the right kinds of hashtags and search terms and so on. And then once you have that data, you can analyze it in any number of ways that can complement sort of the closer analysis that you might be used to doing. So the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Urshena is that one of the things that we believe strongly as we are developing this user interface, and one of the reasons we wanted to present it to you all today, is that we want your feedback eventually, and the feedback of people who might use a tool like this, to say, you know what, this really doesn't make sense. I think it should look more like this. When I approach the interface, maybe I am not sure where to go, or I'm not sure what to do. And so ultimately, that's our ultimate goal, is to get as many humanities researchers involved as possible in the testing of the interface that we're in the process of developing, but also to reassure researchers that we are proceeding with all of the sort of assumptions and methodologies and sort of ethical foci that people in the humanities would expect. So those are some of the things that we can talk about more as we move on, but I think I've said enough at this point. So go ahead, Urshena.
That's good. Thank you, Claire. I'm going to present my screen. I'd like to share with you guys the page, and I don't know if you have visited our massmine.org page in the first place. I think Claire articulated it really well, that we are looking at it from the perspective of researchers. And one of the things that, like, you can take the time to kind of read, I'm not going to go through all of it, but if you look at the About Us team, this team is a team of researchers from founders to developers. Everybody is in academia. And so we are a group of researchers building it for the other researchers. And the interesting thing, I mean, I come from kind of a corporate background, working at big corporations before I came back to ASU. And from what I've seen, a lot of the social media scraping tools are only available for like private use by companies for marketing research or for commercial use. And whenever I did talk to researchers, they would say, oh, I have to contact this developer who can scrape the code for me and give me the data. And then there is kind of that longer turnaround of getting the data, really figuring out, is that the right data that I need? And then really having that trust in that person that they have set up the data collection correctly. So exciting thing about this tool is it gives you guys, the researchers, a way to not kind of play around with different ways of data collection, making sure that you're collecting the right data at the right scale. And this is what we're here today, is to really show you where we're heading with any design of a web application tool. So currently, if you see on the right, the coding tool is already available. So that's something that if you are a little bit tech savvy, you can start installing it on your terminal and actually start collecting data from Twitter. But again, it's not very accessible. And so the great news, we did get to a second round of funding. So our goal now is to design it. And so what you're going to see right now on the screen is actually wireframes, which is kind of the level below the graphic design mockups that we would generally share, hand off to developers. So bear with our lack of pretty colors and nice fonts here. And again, Claire mentioned that one of the reasons that we need you is we want to set this up kind of as a small focus group. So the screens that you're going to see, I mean, I want you to start thinking about questions like, does this make sense? Would I want something else, something more from this tool, and provide us some of the feedback? And hopefully you're going to be willing to become a, part of a focus group going forward for us once we start actually testing the prototypes. So we have the command line software, so you can check out on the website. We have installation and usage details. And then the MassMine web tool. So we're going to jump into the wireframes here. So if I were to log in to the MassMine tool, first thing I would see as a researcher, if I've been using it maybe for a while, I want to see what are my different collections. So this tool is really cool in a way that it really focuses on various social media tools, not just Twitter, but it also has Wikipedia and Tumblr. And I think they're just expanding it to a wider array of sources. But Twitter, of course, is the most popular one. So you can start looking at different data collections based on the tool that you're interested in. And let's say if you did set up collections already, so we call them collections and studies, and that's something we'd like your feedback on as well. So if you can think of whether collections really captures that study or data collection in this case, that's something that we are trying to figure out right now. So for example, if I go to Twitter and I want to look at the 5 collections that I have, so I might have a list of existing collections, maybe on Black Lives Matter movement or COVID testing, something that's been completed, and I can look at how many tweets I already collected and how long is the duration of that collection. I can look at my in progress collections that are kind of happening right now, because this tool, even in the current terminal form, you can set it up to collect data for you kind of going forward. And I think also it looks at the past data as well. But the primary goal for it is you can set up the collection and you're going to say, I want to observe this for about a month from now. And
yeah,
so
technically, just to clarify, technically, you can search for 7 days previous. And this is actually not our tool. This is the APIs for things for platforms like Twitter. They allow you to search for 7 days previous and then moving forward. So this kind of data collection needs to be thought of kind of as it's happening, but then once you think of it, you'll want to start it so that you can collect that data moving forward, because it doesn't actually allow you to look back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Twitter, I believe actually, Aaron, our developer, told us that it charges you for the past data. So this tool, I guess in itself, is going to be looking at what's free and available for those social media sites. So you might look at the collections that you have completed in progress, and you can either preview the data, you can download the data in a variety of formats, like Excel, CSV, and then you can clone existing studies to help you kind of set them up so you don't have to do it from the beginning again. And if I were to go back, let's say you do want to set up a new collection and you're going to say, well, I'm interested in Twitter in this example. And we're now going to get to the screen where you have basically, I feel like you probably might have interacted with tools like that, where you have kind of the basic set of filters that you might want to consider. So in this case, we decided to pick Game of Thrones. It's actually from I think a year ago that we set this up. So if you enter the keyword, which is Game of Thrones, you can enter multiple keywords and or, so some of the kind of the Boolean operators. And then you can set a limit on number of tweets, set it up from one day to another, enter location, and keep adding kind of different filters that you might be interested in. And then you have a way of previewing the data where before you even attempt the collection, you can preview to kind of see what kind of data am I getting. And some of the researchers that we have already interviewed for this process have given us feedback that they'd like to, before they commit to downloading large amounts of data, they do want to kind of check out, like, am I just getting the right data based on this? So it's kind of a trial and error process, and that's what we want this tool to really allow you guys to do. If you preview your data and it looks good and you're ready to commit and collect it, you can collect the data, and the view that you're going to get here is actually of a raw data where you can scroll through, look at the timestamp, username, hashtags, and Twitter, I believe has like dozens and dozens of different, I guess, for columns there available, and you're able to select which ones you want to preview, but you're going to be able to download them all. You can also then visualize data. So visually being able to know, especially if you're downloading thousands of tweets, you want an ability to kind of look at it kind of holistically and see if there are any crazy outliers out there or just something that might not make sense. And so there's going to be a variety of these graphs that are going to help you primarily determine whether what you're collecting kind of looks valid in some way, because that's kind of a big, I would say, step for a lot of researchers we have talked about, is that they might be collecting data, but they're checking it, and maybe they have to adjust something before they start collecting data again. And then of course we have export data where you can, once you're happy with what you have, you can keep exporting data and then use whatever set of analytical tools that you have to really start analyzing it. And that's something to really mention about this tool, is that this tool is meant for data collection. So everything from beginning to end is focused on collection, even visualizations. It's not an analytical tool because you guys already use a set of maybe analytical tools in your arsenal. And so we just want to make sure that you have the data in the format that you need to be able to then analyze it and derive conclusions from it. And yeah, I think that's actually the last screen. So I think at this point, I'd like to open up floor for questions. I don't know if we have questions in the chat, but if you have any questions regarding any specific screens, we can go back and discuss them. Any kind of, I guess, more terminology and language around these screenshots and wireframes that you've seen, or just in general, our process, we're happy to answer that.
I will say two more things as you think of your questions. You may notice that there's not like a Facebook option here, and most of the ways in which we are limited are ethically driven. The platforms themselves make it very hard to get data. Twitter is getting a lot better. Because it's such a public platform, it makes sense that they would be a little bit more cooperative. Something like Facebook is not, and it's just not possible to sort of, and not ethical to sort of dive in and try and get anything that's not publicly posted. So, and then there's some question methodologically whether that is reflective of trends the way that it is on Twitter. So there's a lot of discussion and a lot of really important theoretical discussion that goes around what platforms are available and how social media data should be treated from a researcher's perspective. I mean, obviously it's, in this case, Twitter is not an anonymous tool, but there are still sort of considerations about how we use it. There's a lot of, one thing that we haven't talked a lot about either is there's a lot of data scraping tools just for websites. So Wikipedia, so if you wanted to study the way in which Wikipedia posts have changed over a certain topic, like Black Lives Matter, like COVID-19, and so on and so forth, you can actually set up a study to monitor changes in a Wikipedia page. So in that respect, that would also give you access to sort of the living organism of some of these textual documents. And then we're also looking at HathiTrust, which is a book repository, and some other sources. So we're always trying to incorporate new sources, and largely we have to stay away from anything that is, sort of privacy and platform specific that's not public. So that's why you might not see those here.
So I'll jump in and say, first of all, thank you both so much for that presentation. I am excited that I finally got to see a little bit of the MassMine interface work that you guys have been doing. I absolutely love the look and feel of it. So I'll be excited to be part of the next focus group in addition to this focus group. And then just as a reminder, if you have questions and you want to type them in chat, go ahead and type them in chat. But if you want to raise your hand via Zoom, I'm really happy to unmute you. You don't have to open up your video if you don't want to be in the recording. I would love to start with maybe the most difficult question, which is a question about data ethics a little bit more. Some recent or maybe not so recent work, and I can't remember anyone off the top of my head that has written on this, but maybe some people that have joined us today have talked a little bit about kind of the ethics of data collection on Twitter and how, even though it is a public platform, some people that use Twitter don't know that their data can be downloaded and used. And I wonder if that has been in any conversations with the MassMine development team, as you guys have talked about the development of the tool and the ways in which it could be used.
Okay, I'm going to tell you that's in every conversation of the MassMine development team. I mean, one of the nice things about the entire development team being researchers at universities and humanities researchers with that is that we are constantly, we're sort of tripping over ourselves to try and anticipate what the ethical questions will be and how to address those. One of the things that we believe really strongly in, that I'm really excited that's going to happen once this is developed in the sort of year 3 of this grant, is that we're going to write a textbook, and it's going to be an open source textbook, so it's going to be freely available. And one of the things that we've all agreed is really important is that the textbook isn't just a how-to, but it's really a discussion of methodology and ethics. So you can scrape all the data you want and do a really poor job of protecting people's identities, of analyzing the data, and sometimes it can be the result of people just not being familiar with how to research on this level, sort of the methods that would be involved. Maybe they're not used to doing sort of more quantitative level research. Sometimes the ethical questions that we talk about seem rather obvious, but then you're like, but the fact that someone's asking about them means that they're not exactly obvious. I know that one of the conversations we had recently was some work that was published about Pinterest, which is obviously a public site, but people do these sort of scathing analyses of Pinterest sites, and or not Pinterest, I'm sorry, Etsy. Sorry, I don't know why I had a brain fart there. Etsy sites. So they're public shops, but people will do these sort of in-depth analyses of rhetorical analyses or all kinds of levels, and they will call people out in really sort of destructive ways. And so I think what we've always believed is that keeping data anonymous is key. And so anonymity is absolutely essential to everything you do on a big data scale. Now, having said that, one thing that humanities researchers are especially adept at is the close reading that can happen through an interchange. So we're not saying that that can't happen, but at this level, when you collect data on this level, you really, I mean, these are ongoing discussions, but it's one of those things that you err on the side of anonymity. You err on the side of not calling people out individually, and you use big data research to talk about big trends, and sort of put it in the place that it is. And then if you have other interactions, like high profile interactions that might have happened on Twitter that have been reported in the news, that are very sort of public and that warrant further discussion, you can do more of an analysis on that level. But for the most part, I think people have to remember that there are real people behind these communications. And when you don't keep that in mind, that's when you get into these ethical areas that I think are destructive.
I couldn't have asked for a better answer. Thank you, Claire. And I don't want to cut off Arshana if Arshana would like to pop in with any thoughts.
Oh no, I trust that Claire covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that reminder that real people are behind the data, right? I think that's really important for anyone that's using social media in whatever project or study that they're doing. So thank you for that. And anonymity and, what is it? The no possibility of re-identification, right? Those two things. So again, please pop into chat if you have questions or raise your hand if you have questions, but everyone here knows me and they know that I can keep asking questions until the end of the hour.
I'm curious, I'd like to ask questions to the attendees is, how many of you do social media research currently and what are the topics? It's kind of, I'm just curious to hear because I'm trying to imagine the interaction of how would you guys interact with the tool if you did have access to it.
Hey, my name is Michelle. I'm actually from the marketing department, and I was just invited here by another marketing PhD student who knows Arshana. And I recently just started collecting Twitter data, and I really like the fact that you can run it for an extended period of time, because I've primarily been using R-Tweet, and it's really just that 6 to 9 collection day period. So like that was the thing to me. I'm like, that's super useful, and it'd be really, really great to use it moving forward. So
what is that? Is it R-Tweet, you said?
yeah, it's an R package that basically works with Twitter's API to run this. So you just need to know R rather than being able to go to the command line.
Only just need to know R.
Yeah.
because the founders of MassMine are people who are very well versed in R, and I've got 1 foot in R and 1 foot not in R, very outside of R. And so it's been interesting to work with people and sort of their comfort level with, scripting languages versus not. And the other thing that is something you bring up is these time limits. There are a lot of sort of rules that a lot of people aren't aware of, or limits that are going to be incorporated into this tool. So for instance, Twitter won't let you collect more than, is it 1% of all the tweets on a certain hashtag, which I was shocked by.
It did say 1 to 1.5, something like that. So
1 to 1.5%. So what's interesting about this, and what researchers should be aware of, is all of these things, these affordances, but at the same time, you're not getting every tweet. You're not getting every tweet that's ever been made using this hashtag. You're getting 1 to 1.5% of them, which is still like millions, but it's still sort of a snapshot or a representation instead of, this all-encompassing thing. So, it shows you the limitations of this kind of research, but one of my driving motivations has always been that I think as researchers, we don't expand the potential and possibility enough. We don't think creatively and cleverly enough about how we can make our research richer and better and more holistic. And we may know one method, but this may be another method that will complement the one, the other method that we know. So I'm always kind of encouraging researchers to step outside their comfort zone and try something new in that respect.
And I think Mike Tuller had a question.
Not so much a question as just another response. This isn't my studies. I don't personally work with social media data, but worked with a graduate student last semester who did, and she was interested in a particular type of Spanish language discourse, a sort of a competitive insult conversation, which had moved, which is very much an in-person sort of thing. And she was interested in how that discourse moves online, especially because it was it took place only in certain sort of restricted social situations. And so how that same sort of thing would happen in Twitter, which defines space much more differently. So anyway, that was, I mean, it was a sort of thing where in the end, you know, like you said, close reading is really the objective. But she did first need to see, well, you know, is it even out there at all? And that was really hard to find out, actually. So, yeah.
Well, and that's a perfect example where the preview data is so useful in this kind of tool, because oftentimes we'll be looking for something that's very culturally specific, and you may be searching for it, you may be searching for what you think it will realize as, and you're not getting what you want. And then you realize that either it's, as you said, in sort of certain specific contextualized situations, or it's only happening in certain areas, and one of the things that we can identify is location. So you can actually, instead of collecting the 1%, looking all across everywhere, all across Twitter worldwide, you can actually identify specific locations. I think you can go to zip codes and cities. I think that's the extent of it. But and that might get you closer to some of these more contextualized conversations.
Right, and her particular interest was gendered. That this, you know, there's these sort of male only conversational spaces, and Twitter is not going to, I mean, it's bad enough, but it's not going to be that. And the conversation, I mean, when her close reading, to the extent that we did get to that data, her close reading did show that opening the space up, in having this conversation in a space where women also existed, created a different sort of response pattern, different audience for the discourse. It was really pretty interesting.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. One of the things that we're interested in, if you guys know anybody or grad students or any other researchers or any curious person, is trying to think of all the use cases for a tool like this. Because the more that we can figure out how people want to use it, the better we can design it. And the more that we can anticipate what kinds of questions you would be asking, what kinds of keywords, what kinds of parameters you might you know, want to narrow your search results using, the better we can figure out how to make the tool the most useful tool it can be.
I don't want to cut anyone off, so jump in if you'd like to, y'all. If anyone especially has use cases that they can think of, if they know someone or they've considered a use case of working with social media data. I know that there was a graduate student that was unable to make it today, Scott Caddy, who wanted to come because he is currently doing some dissertation work using social media data for corpus analysis of the way Jane Austen is treated on Twitter and the way Jane Austen is discussed on Twitter. So I wonder if, you know, if you've encountered, or if you like this author-based, right? Especially like prominent author-based, how humanities people and the public talk about authors would be a really interesting use case. And I know that Scott might be really interested to talk to this team.
Yeah, that would be great. We would love to talk to him, because those are exactly the instances where, again, it's kind of a hit or miss in terms of what you think the search is going to look like. And then when you start to see the data, you're like, oh no, I was way off. Or that word's not being used the way I thought it was being used. That happens a lot. And so it's an exercise in exploration. And so it's fun to be able to work with people and say, okay, what do you think you're going to see? And then let's see what happens. And then let's see how we can get to what you know, where the data is that you're looking for.
Thank you. And I'll read really quickly, Selena, and then I'll let Mike ask his follow-up question, which is, Selena says, I think use cases also apply to things like gendered language in a certain author's work, for example, Shakespeare, right? I think that's really true. And I think that will become more true if you guys do partner with HathiTrust, which I know would be, this interface on the top of HathiTrust would be so welcome for
Well,
so many.
one of our founders, Nick Horn, that's what he's doing this summer, is making that connection.
For those that don't know, HathiTrust, I know Claire talked about it a little bit. It's a massive digital library where you can currently build collections and search collections in that library. But I think having this kind of user-focused way into the library would only make it easier for researchers to use it. And then I'll let Mike jump in.
Yeah, and I am just sort of following up on before. I mean, you were asking about sort of what additional sort of ways they'd want to do queries. This, again, going back to the student I was with last semester, she was, one of the things she was interested in is sort of, is retweet and like numbers, and also like time frame for those. So which tweets were essentially most popular and how quickly they became popular. Again, the discourse she was studying is rapidity was very important to it. In conversation, if you can't reply within 30 seconds, you've lost the discourse. And she wanted to see what that looks like online. And the answer to, I mean, she wasn't able to get really good data on this, was part of the problem, because we couldn't really filter that. She just, found tweets that interested her and followed those. So it wasn't a real data collection kind of thing. There did seem to be some adaptation that essentially if you hadn't replied within, 2 hours, you were done. Still, I mean, that's the sort of thing that would be good to look for, have filter by what gets most retweets and likes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some functionality for that. I know that most recently we've been talking about YouTube, which you would think is not really a source of language analysis, but actually we can get all of YouTube's metadata. So all of the comments and likes and shares and things like that around a video or a video file. And that kind of content, as you're saying, the sort of meta content that goes along with the tweet or the video or anything else is equally interesting to study. Or Shanna, am I just boxing you out? Do you have anything else to add?
I guess to Mike's point, where someone is looking at like evolution of a tweet, I was kind of thinking how this tool could be used for that, because I was thinking it's more of a, at least in the way that I imagined it being used, I thought it was more of a snapshot. It keeps taking snapshot, but I guess if you keep looking at the snapshots, if it collects tweets and replies, then you can kind of look at like longitudinal data and temporal data along the lines of that. And I just haven't even thought about that as a use case. That's very interesting. And I think we'll have to look into how someone like that would use this tool.
What we're hoping to eventually do, in addition to the open source textbook, is have a repository of use cases that's open source, where people write up little use cases. They can get a publication credit sort of as contributing to the MassMine website. We don't know what we're calling it yet, but it's basically a way where people can share the stories of how they've tried to investigate a question and how they've used MassMine to do it and how they've been able to kind of do it, and maybe what limitations there were, maybe what they had to do to sort of, and tell the story of their research experience. And then hopefully we can have those there to educate people who then come to the site and want to do similar research. So collecting those stories, I think, is going to be imperative to building a robust, research methodology moving forward.
I think this has been implied a little bit by some of the questions, but I know a lot of people that are using Twitter to do a social media analysis of how networks are created, right? And I don't know if that user data of how users interact on Twitter is something that can be extracted from the metadata and from the API. But if so, that would be a really interesting layer that I think a lot of people are doing on their own now.
Roshana, what do you think about the metadata that's available to us now?
Well, right now I know for sure that they do have a metadata around replies. So for example, if there is a single tweet, it can have, I think, a metadata of like, is it in reply to someone? And then it actually mentions I think the tweet ID as well as the Twitter account to which they're replying. So I'm actually thinking there should be a way to kind of map. I know that at Decision Theater, we were developing a tool, and it kind of did show the nodes and networks, because right, you have one person responding, maybe 1,000 people are responding to that, and then each one of those people extends further if somebody is responding to them. So the metadata I know is there, is just a matter of, I guess, are you looking for more visualizations to run that kind of analysis? Because I'm kind of curious what open source tools are there for that kind of analysis? Because I know we can get the metadata. I know that Twitter has that metadata. It's just connecting all of those dots is something that has to be done. And I don't know if this tool necessarily is that, because this tool is all about data collection.
That's a perfect response. I think that's right. And I think some sort of indication on the tool that is possible, if that makes sense, because I don't see maybe in this interface that if someone is looking to come to MassMine to get that data, that they would know they can, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe even like setting up different presets for people. Are you looking to just get a snapshot of a day in life of a hashtag? Are you looking to see the communication between people? In which case, maybe we can change different filters. Like we can have a different preset of filters that someone can start with. I didn't even think about that, but that's actually a very good point.
Yeah, and it points to a problem that any designer has when designing an interface, which is there are a wealth of options, but how do you incorporate all of those, make all of those available without overloading the interface and or making the entire thing too confusing? So what Urshena said, what is, I think, a perfect first go at that is, having some pre-questions saying, what kinds of relationships what kinds of data are you looking for? And then we'll sort of steer you toward these kinds of search parameters versus these. You could do all of them, but you would have to be really organized in your mind about sort of what that would look like and why. And that's where, that's, I guess, maybe the fun for us is figuring out how to make that accessible and understandable at the same time.
And then is there anything else, Claire and Urshena, if you guys would like to ask us any other further questions? I have kind of a wrap-up question, but I don't want to cut that conversation off.
We mostly just want people to get in touch with us if they, with all the, the more ideas we can get about how people could possibly use this, even if they're not going to use it. Like, I don't necessarily do social media research myself. So I need as many people as possible to give me all of the ideas that they have about how they would possibly want to do social media research. And that helps us address all the possibilities that we might encounter. Because what we're concerned about is that people are going to come to the tool if they're not sure about the tool, if they're not sure how the tool works. And if the tool doesn't appear to meet their needs, they may just stop. They may just stop right there and not pursue it. And then what loses is the research, the knowledge that you might develop over that kind of research. And so we want to be able to anticipate as much as possible so that we can help further the goals of individual researchers with the ultimate goal of furthering humanities research in general. Just adding to the knowledge of how we can analyze what's happening in our world and understand it better. But we need researchers to do that research first.
That was such a beautiful place to end things that I think I actually might, I might have us wrap up now. And just if there's one further thought, something you want us to come away with, maybe a way to get in contact with you guys. Is there a Twitter we can follow, etc.?
Well, you have our email addresses. I'm notoriously off of Twitter. It's like so shameful, but I can't do it. And so I'm one of those people who's on the back end, but I'm not on the front end of Twitter. And basically, I mean, people might see calls going out. We're going to try and network with the IHR and get people who might be interested in just giving us a little bit of feedback on the interface. Maybe just looking at, we would send you a mock-up. You might look at it with an idea you might have in mind, and then talk out loud over what kinds of issues you have when you're looking at the interface, what seems confusing, what doesn't seem to work just the way you would want it to, and so on and so forth. It's that kind of research, which is the kind of that we're going to be doing in the fall. So, but we need as many people to participate as possible. And the key here is that you don't have to know what you're doing. A lot of times people mistakenly assume that if they're going to participate in some sort of usability of some interface, they have to know what they're doing either as a researcher, they have to have done this before. In fact, it's the exact opposite. We want people who have no idea what they're doing and maybe just have an idea, and maybe they're not even sure. So it's the basic humanities researcher who has never done this before, doesn't even know if they want to do it. Maybe they're not very confident about it. Maybe they just think this isn't maybe for them. And those folks are the ones who are going to give us the best feedback. And those folks are the ones for whom we are designing. So that's what we would implore, is to have people volunteer a few minutes of their time, especially if they really don't know what they're doing and wouldn't know what to do with a tool like this.
Arshana, any wrap-up thoughts?
No, I was just kind of chatting with people on the chat privately, and I'm excited to have as many of you as we can as users to test this. It's always so interesting because I think we live and breathe this tool for like the last year and a half, right? So we're just too familiar with it. We don't see all the little things that you guys will be able to even from today's meeting, I think I got already a couple of really good nuggets that I'm like, wow, we're gonna go back and maybe redesign something. So it's exciting.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Arshana. Thank you for joining us. I think that leaving us with that kind of really amazing look at the power of what usability testing can do for developing projects is perfect. So I'll just end by saying thank you one more time, and then reminding everyone that actually